Welcome to our Play Well podcast series. My name is Jenny Lester, and I am the Learning and Development Officer at Play Scotland, the national organisation for play. Today, we will look at play and museums. To explore this, we will hear from Loretta Mordi and Lauren Henning. Loretta is the Museum Development Manager, Learning and Engagement at Museums Galleries Scotland, the national development body for museums and galleries in Scotland. She has a passion for education and learning and culture, equality, diversity and inclusion, and social justice. She convenes the MGS Strategic Learning Forum, and she is keen on the social impact of museum and heritage learning and health and well-being. Lauren Henning is the Learning and Museum Manager at the Tall Ship Glenlee in Glasgow. From West Lothian forests onboard Glaswegian ships to Orcadian galleries, Lauren has worked in the cultural and heritage organisations the length and breadth of Scotland, and she joined the Glenlee team in March 2021. Lauren believes passionately in the importance of play within heritage spaces, and that museum and learning departments need to work together to remain forward-thinking and relevant to their communities. Here is our Play Pedagogy Project Officer, Fiona Kirkland, catching up with Loretta and Lauren.
Hello, Lauren and Loretta. Thank you so much for joining us on our podcast today. I wonder if we could start off and maybe you could introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what play means to you. So, Lauren, if you would like to go first.
Hello, my name is Lauren Henning and I am the Learning and Museum Manager at the Tall Ship Glenlee in Glasgow. Play is important to me because I think it starts at such a young age, and it's how children instinctually engage and process and begin to understand the world on their own terms. And I think if we can make sure that they can continue doing this for as long as is useful and enjoyable for them, I think it means that they can approach the world in a much more equal and fun way. And hopefully it leads them to being happy and more well-adjusted adults.
Thank you. That's so intriguing. That's lovely. Thank you so much. And Loretta?
My name is Loretta Mordi, and I am the Museum Development Manager for Learning and Engagement at Museums Galleries Scotland. What plays means to me, I think I like this quote from Milda Brydike, who says is an early year researcher, and she said, play is the first independent activity of which the child keeps control. Play is the space where children can practice their ideas and all possible skills in an independent manner. Play is very important for social and cognitive development, of children and young people. Playing helps support the development of child's brain, development of language skills, problem solving, gaining perspectives, memory and creativity, and with right environment and conditions, children can play and learn, and in a more fun, but at the same time, whether intentionally or not, they become part of it because they have their own experiences anyway in them. And all adults have to do is to just leave them to take the lead.
That's great. I would totally agree with everything you've just said. Absolutely. I don't think you'd have any arguments at Play Scotland. So people have said that museums haven't historically been very playful places, and they've got a bit of a false reputation as being a bit sort of stuffy, dusty, and a bit boring. What do you think of that? Do you think things are changing?
I'll take this one before Lauren, only because of, my role. Yes, museums, I think I can understand why this perception, which has been for quite a long time, especially for young people and other, parents and children anyway, who perceive that. And that is because of the role of museum as the custodians of historical objects, and the artifacts, some of which are deemed to be, and many of them very much to be preserved, in terms of longevity and safeguard for the valuable use, cultural heritage use of generations, to come. And that is why. And in most cases, and in most of the venues have not been designed, to be accessible for young people or with young people play in mind at all. So in essence, they preserve old materials, but they are things that people need to learn about, is to enable young people and people of all ages to learn about other cultures and be able to then, use that to inform today and yesterday, today, and tomorrow. And that is why it looks so. It is just that bit about, they are not there. But having said that, museums also they are also educational institutions. The education is central to their work. So all of those subjects, all of those cultural objects and the like, they are supposed to be for learning. And therefore, they should also be not for just certain people. It should be accessible for every people of all ages, including children and young people. However, it is the gallery spaces, it is the design sometimes that actually make these places not very much accessible or a kind of, welcoming for young people. And they see it and they said, well, it's not for me. There isn't anything for me to do here. And that is the perception, but things are changing. But museums, I can say, must be accessible to people of all ages, regardless of background or ages or whatever it is. And all of their educational materials and display interactive programs and the like should be used in order for everybody and children in different ways, using different approaches to enable them to feel engaged and, be welcoming to the venue.
Thank you. Do you have anything to add, Lauren?
I had some points in mind when I was reading the questions beforehand, and quite literally, Loretta said every single one of those points. I was going to talk about the design, the architecture, the exhibitions, the programmes, and Loretta beautifully covered every single one. I think that saying that museums have a false reputation, I don't necessarily think it is a false reputation. I think it's probably something that has been earned. And in many ways, it was probably quite intentional of early museums and how museums first came about, that they prioritised only one point of view. And it was very much towards people who look like them, middle class, white, probably male. And that was the viewpoint that was prioritised and was aimed at. And over the past probably 40 years, perhaps, that's getting broken down through all the ways that Loretta has mentioned, that sharing knowledge and information with children is just as important as anybody else. And that goes from everything from putting objects that they can see at a height that they can see, having language in the museum that means that they can understand and comprehend on their own terms, and just even the outreach and all the things that all the different departments go towards a museum, they need to be as accessible and open as possible. And Loretta put it beautifully together. So I hope my answer reinforces exactly what she was saying.
It was perfect. Thank you so much. It really opened my eyes to the fact that obviously museums used to be, but actually they are changing. And I think everything changes in a modern society. Certainly now I notice that you've got more sort of digital things that's sort of more hands-on. And I think that probably is something that's a bit more interesting for younger children as well. So what would you say has been changing over the last few years that museums have become more playful now? I know you were saying there's sort of like, before there were very much institutions. And how do you balance that sort of being respectful of the museum and the artefacts with sort of play?
Can I jump in there? My role at the Tall Ship Glenlee is I'm museum and learning manager. And so I think within the museum hierarchy, the curatorial kind of museum thing has always been placed at the top. They're the priority. They're the ones given the most resources and budget and opportunities. But I think learning departments are getting more and more priority. And very often I'm seeing, particularly in where I've worked in the past, learning and museum are either working more closely together or they're within the same department. And that gives a kind of more equal feel to the museums, that everything that a museum person writes needs to be looked at by the learning department to make sure their audience is being catered to, as well as the audience that perhaps the museum person has been prioritised. So I think that kind of structural thing is really helping to make sure that museums are becoming more approachable and more playful. And for me, as working within this industry, I started as a learning person. I've been a learning professional for longer than I have been a museum person, even though that was what I originally trained in. But learning was a little bit more free, a little bit more exciting, and that then I kind of went back into museum. And so I'm taking a learning perspective to the museum department rather than the other way around. So I have worked with kids of all ages. I've worked with schools, I've worked with nurseries, I've worked with older folk, younger folk, and I'm bringing that into my museum role, which I find really exciting. And I think that this is not just within the individual museums. I think Museum Gallery Scotland has particularly helped me an awful lot. They've done a lot of training about play. That has really given me an awful lot more confidence. They've had professionals sharing case studies, things that they have done. There was a wonderful woman from the I can't quite remember. I think she worked for the Victory, so I would imagine it was the Maritime in Portsmouth. And she talked about a play trail that she did. And that completely inspired me to do my own one, which I'll hopefully talk about later on. But just seeing how, not necessarily easy, but how it can be done, that really has helped me an awful lot. And it's made everything open up. And rather than these tiny little departments working independently, just working together, seeing what other museums have done, making sure that the MGS is helping everybody from that umbrella institution. It's all been fantastic for me as working within the industry.
Thank you so much. I love your passion, Lauren. It's lovely.
I am so pleased to hear that because, as a learning person, this is who we are. We're very, very passionate about our area of work, and we are the people, in museum sector. Yes, I think Lauren covered everything, but I would just say a little bit about in terms of how this improvement have been shaping over the years. I mean, I've worked in this sector for the past 16 years, and I've always been a learning and engagement and collection manager person, and we're supporting the museums learning practitioners in terms of the museum learning provision for people of all ages. Things have been changing. In fact, museums have been trying to improve access to their buildings, to their venues, facilities, making it as inclusive as possible, for everybody to come in, or different audiences, including children and young people. They have been using creative and approaches, some of which, Lauren have described there, to encourage and develop family-friendly, interactives and activities. Very much recently, too, they have been looking at, redesigning the gallery spaces and the children learning spaces to make it even brighter and sort of, very much from the point of view of, children's in terms of asking them what they want to see and helping in terms of the design of the gallery learning spaces so that, it's not just about stuff or about dressing up. It's also about the interactive tools in digital opportunity. Technology has provided opportunities for touch screen. Even you now see people using Legos and all of that, in that. But most recently, during the COVID might be, one of the very much problematic, but there is some indirect, opportunities that came out of that in terms of using the outdoor spaces. So museums have been using outdoors, there's some of them that have that site, the venue. And during the Summer of Play program, many of our museums took part in that, and Museums Gallery Scotland provided funding for them to actually develop their outdoor spaces to welcome children under 5s and their families so that they can make use of that, given that the venues, have been changed and have closed due to pandemic. You couldn't touch the interactives and all of that. But could they also use play areas in different ways and develop that so that children can use that? After all, fresh air is always also a good thing, for the development of young people. And this is, the way in which museums have been able to use that to stimulate, curiosity, learning, and creativity of children and young people, particularly for under 5 provision up to the age of, 8 years. And that parents can come into that. Actually, we're beginning to see even young parents now using some of our museums, which they will never have gone to because of the collections, nature of their collections. Lawrence one is an example, but another one is the Scottish Maritime Museum, whom, their collection is like, why would a mother want to go into this big shipment, collection thing, industrial thing? But they have used their spaces. And now we have children using the beach area, their mothers coming in and using that place and seeing it as different things. And there are coffee areas too that they use there. So there are things that, museums have been doing to stimulate, children's learning and encourage, under fives and improve under five provisions in the museum lately.
Lovely to see that obviously they're using not just using the resources and their artifacts, but actually they're using their space as well, which is,
yes,
for other things that might lure people in. Well, they're in, I suppose they could then, that's quite interesting over there. It's really good. So can I just ask you, why do you think play is important in the museum? Why would you say?
Article 31 of the United Nations of Convention of, Rights of Child say that, all countries must recognize, and it looks like I'm reading this because I don't know it off head. All countries must recognize the right of the child to rest and leisure, to engage in play and recreational activities appropriate to their age of the child, and to participate freely in cultural life and the arts. That word, cultural rights, and the arts, life and the arts, also means museums. So through formal learning and engagement, play should happen in many places, and museums are not supposed to be exceptional. So I'll stop there right now and let Lauren come in before I see the other one.
I think from my point of view, I think it's what can benefit the museum and what can benefit the people using the museum. So from the museum side, I think by making a museum more playful, it's almost an investment in the future. I feel that the more diverse a museum can prove it is, the different communities, the different age groups, the different institutions it works with, the more fundamental it becomes to the community in which it works with. And museums just can't be one thing these days. That is not what museums need to be. They need to prove themselves working with as many different people and communities and audiences as possible, because then they're more likely to get funding, get different resources that ensure the future of the museum in its own right. With the context that we're all living in these days, that budgets, out with museums, everything is getting squeezed. People are being more selective about how they spend the money, where they spend the money. So if they're willing to go to visit a museum in which they feel welcomed and that their children can be children, that means that they're benefiting, but also the museum is benefiting, because then we can prove that we are vital, that we are important, that we're not just about an object in a glass case that you can't touch. It's more fundamental and more important than that. And I think from a family or a child point of view, museums are very much can be a safe space in which children can be a child and play and experiment and be exposed to very different situations, environments that they might not be able to be in different places. And so that means that they can work through it in the ways that we talked about before, about exploring and imagination and imitating and experiencing things in a sensory way that they can't anywhere else. For example, that my museum is a ship. We are quite literally a ship that is 126 years old. Where else in Glasgow, almost in Scotland, apart from another two, can a child have that feeling of being on a ship, feeling it move, having the senses and the smells, but in a very safe, controlled environment? It's so much more than learning about the history of the ship. It's everything else that goes into the experience of going to a place. And I think you can't talk about the benefits of play without talking about the benefits of the museum and the benefits to the communities that are using it.
Yes. And Lauren covered that very, very well, because I think practically she should be able to say that, because that's them who do this work. But, just to add on top of that is that play is important, because through play, children can learn to explore, as Lauren have said, and investigate, being active, playing. But at the same time, museums can give children lots of opportunity to learn through play, by involving them in everyday activities, being curious, asking questions like, what if, why is that, things like that. And intentionally or not, they are learning. And other children with them at that time too are learning from them. So it's like a peer-to-peer, for them. And by exploring and asking those questions, museums know how to do that. Children can then learn and develop all of their communications skills, all of their language skills, all of their critical thinking, skills, all of which helps them in terms of knowing the world that they are in and develop that confidence, successful learners, and being confident, responsible citizens, which is what we are actually also saying, given that we want to give children the best start in life. Museums can help support all of these policy agenda areas that is looking at giving the child, the Scottish government looking at child's, giving the best start in life for children and allowing children to be themselves and enjoy play and, be part of the leisure and be part of the culture in which they live so they can be understanding other people as well. And this is the right time, children at the right time for them to shape all of this. It's not when they are sitting at the dinner, in their own homes with their parents. Actually, parents learn a lot from children too. And what they learn from outside among their peers sometimes, in the right environment, the right condition, actually shape the discussion. And parents also learn from that at the dinner table.
Thank you so much. That was great. Love how you brought the UNCRC in. That's great. It's always nice. That's one of our aims as well. Now, Lauren, you mentioned about you were really proud of one of the bits that you'd actually worked on, one of the projects. Would you like to tell us a bit more about that? What sort of inspired you? Why were you proud of it?
Absolutely. I was hoping I'd get to toot my own horn a wee bit. So, as Loretta mentioned, that summer of 2021, was it? Or 2020? Yes. Was the summer of play. And this was a really wonderful thing. It was not long after I started at the ship as well. So it was kind of me playing with the idea of using play as well. So that was really nice. And it was a fun that we could apply for and just use it to be experimental on how we engaged with young people and families over one summer. And it was not long after I attended one of the training sessions as well about play trails, about having not structured play, but invitations, suggestions. And I think it really helped with people who have this view of museums as being things don't touch, walk carefully, be careful, But having these little invitations, it really opened up how people could interact with the museum. So the play trail that we put together for Summer of Play were just little A5, I think, little cards. They were bright yellow. They were very, almost Blue Petery. We just printed them out and stuck them around the ship with command strips. It was really low tech, which was fantastic. And there was about 13 of them around from the ship, from top to bottom, right to left. And it was just little things about using their imagination and little things that they could do on the ships, like pretend you were sailing somewhere, use the wheel and imagine that you're sailing through, just silly little imaginative things. And it was really good fun watching people be surprised by them, that we were allowing them to do things that they never imagined that they could be allowed to do on the ship. And that was such a success that led us last summer to use it again. And this was to support an exhibition that I put together. So this was for the Year of Stories, again, helped by MGS. And this was an exhibition I put together about an apprentice who sailed on the ship 100 years ago. And so in addition to a more typical exhibition and digital thing, I also put together a play trail that was based on the experience of the apprentice who lived on the ship. So it was still using play, but using it to reinforce the exhibition programme. And I think that was where what I'm talking about departments or being together or working together, how they can really reinforce this. So it was the same format, just very, stuck up with command strips. But it was like, Andy lived on this ship. Imagine what it would be like to be away from your parents. Would you be scared? Would you be excited? How did the adventure feel? And then they could go downstairs and see a picture of Andy and kind of match up the things of their experience on the ship with the experience of the historical figure whose story I was trying to tell. And I mean, I'm incredibly lucky that the institution I work in is a ship. It is just such a playful place almost naturally. And it's really great that there's so many things that we have on the ship that are already quite hands-on. We have little buckets and brooms so people can swab the deck and imagine what it would have been like when they were really swabbing the deck. We've got a bell that they can ring, which drives all the staff absolutely round the bend. But kids love it because it's like ringing the bell, saying, I'm here, this is my ship, and hearing what it would have been like if the bell was ringing at sea. We have a cargo pulley system, so they can put little sugar sacks at the cargo hold and pull it up through the tween deck and see how cargo would have been manoeuvred around the ship when we were at sea. So it was really great to add this all together and really create an atmosphere in which children and families, I think it's not just about the family, the parents sending the kids off to play. I really hope to design things that families could work together and have this moment when they don't have to worry about, food or being home or cleaning or work, that they could just have that time together and use their imagination. And hopefully, as Loretta said, it would be something that would last, that they could talk about at the dinner table, that they can remember fondly and recommend and just grow the audience, as we always hope to do.
I'm sure you've been very successful in doing that, and I think there'll be lots of conversation around dinner tables, I would imagine. I just like the fact that you've got that, you've put that added little resource, that provocation, that just to ignite that imagination, and that must be just magical for children, just to give them that little spark of inspiration. I love that. I think that's great. It'll be fantastic. Loretta, is there anywhere that you've considered, or any bit that you've visited that you're proud of or had inspired?
I must say to you that, since the lockdown, they've been doing all of this. I have been visiting many museums in Scotland that have been doing this. One of them, it's Lawrence, Museum, which I know very well. I've been there when they do things for children, particularly primary schools, and how they have incorporated all of the learning activities using volunteers and the, what do they call them? The naval,
the radio officers,
officers to come in and get young children to ask questions and try out things. I have also been impressed by Glasgow museums, that have also incorporated. They've always done the mini museum. They have a mini museum there as for the early years, 0 to 5, and they have also been reviewing their early years programming, to see how they can improve upon that. And I also, like I mentioned, the Scottish Maritime is another one that I've been doing, fantastic work around that. But one other museum that I must say I have visited is the McManus Museum in Dundee, who have very, very much, gallery space area for children, to just be themselves, dress up and do whatever they like. I've taken my grandchildren to visit that museum as well. And they have been, wonderful. Dundee Transport Museum, which doesn't have that kind of big space, during Christmas, they've actually brought in a coach, which they adapted so that the Father Christmas can, sit in there, and adapted it to suit children and families, to come in. I took my grandchildren to that. It was wonderful. You wouldn't even know it was just sitting adjacent to the museum there. So you walk from the museum into this coach that is also another museum, kind of a mobile museum in itself, except it's static, but it is wonderful to see all of the playgrounds there. So a lot of museums have been doing a lot of work around this area since then. And this was only last year that I'm talking about, for the Dundee Transport Museum. But they have been incorporating, as Lauren said, MGS has been looking at this area of, improving provision for early years learning. 0 to 5, we're spreading it to 8. And we have developed we have done a literature review with University of Glasgow to conduct that, to ensure that we understand the state of museums provision for this category of, of young people, and see how we can shape our own support for this provision, because we don't know enough, but we now know. We've got the reports, and we have been using that to shape, and inform our support. Our grant system provides us the opportunity to support museums learning, in terms of training the learning practitioners, like Lauren had said, and also working with kids in museums, and hoping to work with yourselves, Play Scotland, but also developing and strengthening a partnership with Education Scotland and early years learning. So we have been doing that for the past, 3 years. And we now know that museums have been doing this. Part of that is, looking at the fact that now we have the new strategy. Play is one priority area in our national strategy. I am so excited about it. And it's also something that we want to continue to develop and ensure that, we encourage practitioners to continue to improve upon. And the play prompt training that Lauren was, muting on that time was run and delivered by kids in museums, who really, have been very good at improving access for children, and young people over the years. And we work in partnership with them. And we're going to be working with Education Scotland to now come early years and care department to come and talk to museums in September around provision, for early years learning, 0 to 8, but looking at the policy framework around ambition. What's that statement of ambition? Realizing the ambition being me framework, and ensuring that museums, get their, understand that and in line with, what they need to be developing on and its experiences and outcomes, using that to develop that and shape their activities. But we want to also see more family-friendly, activities, going on. And we want not just providing for 0 to 5 or 8, we want them to also include engagement with parents and carers, accompanying, young people. And that is the way what we want to see coming. This is what MGS has in plans, in place for museums. But I continue to visit museums, and I will be visiting more of them. Sterling Smith took part in that Summer of Play program. I want to see what, how museums have, been building and embedding all of these approaches.
That just sounds wonderful. I just love the fact that you're actually including our younger learners as well. I think that's, where maybe historically they've been seen to be too young to be going to a museum. I just think that's a lovely thing to actually include everybody. And then obviously you've got like your primary school children, your teenagers as well, and it seems as if you're working really hard to make sure it's right for everybody. So that's you definitely deserve a big pat on the back for that. So just moving on to the next question, we do love a top tip at Play Scotland. So what are your top tips for people who are working in museums? How would you get them to incorporate play? What would be your tip to get them to incorporate play?
It can be incredibly easy to do this. When we were developing the play prompt trail, one of the things we did is just watch how young people and families naturally react within the space. Like, what do the kids want to do in the ship, like before they get told they can't? Or do they want to go and touch everything? Do they want to explore the spaces as they, like, on the floor or up high? How do they want to do that? This might sound a wee bit creepy, but listen to groups of children. Like, what questions are they asking their adults or themselves? Are they having a little imagination run within their own groups as well? Like, all those things can be used and capitalised on, because of one group of children or family doing it, you can almost guarantee that another family will do it. So it sounds a wee bit, creepy, but just listen and watch and be there and see how people do it. You don't have to dictate too much. It all can come from a very natural place. Another thing that we did was we invited a school class who were visiting the ship anyway, if they would spend 15 minutes with us. And we gave them a very official sound about play consultants. And so this group, we explained what we were doing, and we said that, you are the people we're trying to get in the ship and to enjoy. And we want to see you as your expertise. So it made them feel very important. And so we gave them some of the ideas to try out. And some of our ideas, they just absolutely poo-pooed. And they're like, nope, that's not interesting at all. Then they came up with their own ideas and they critiqued some of our ideas, and we changed them, because it was fantastic how seriously they took it, because they really thought about how they would interact, but also how their little brothers or sisters would interact. So it wasn't just them and their experience of being 8. It was like, how would a primary 1 feel about this? And it was just wonderful, giving them the importance and the relevance and just seeing the pride that they had. And we made a little plaque on the ship saying thank you to this primary school for helping us. And it was really lovely. And it just can be as easy as that. Just spending time and watching, I think, would be my top tips.
I love that, how you've embraced that creative thinking of young people. I think that's wonderful. Unfortunately, sometimes we can sort of stem that as they get older. It's lovely. They're so creative when they're younger. Loretta, do you have any top tips?
Yes, I think for me, Lauren has covered that, because I was actually going to use their museum as an example of, what museums can do. Things you can do on a shoestring. You don't really need to break the banks, for that at all. I think, first of all, learn from your peers who have done it before. Talk to them. They will soon be able to tell you their experiences, where challenges. Although museums are very different, they are diverse in the shapes and sizes and the like. But approaches sometimes tend to be varied. And depending on, who you have coming in, you've got to talk to them. And then you will learn and use it to shape your own ideas. But most importantly, look at our Museums Gallery Scotland national strategy. There are actions for museums there in terms of play, It's a progressive area of work and of change. And we want to support museums who are interested and who want to do this, to be able to do it. And our grant outcomes is tied to one of that, to the play area. So learning and engagement. So in order to be able to do so, you can use our small grant to even start a small process in this, in terms of developing your interactives and the like. Look on website. Our website has lists of, resources that can help you in terms of ideas and how you can weigh from other museums as well. But most importantly, develop your own knowledge and expertise around play and children play 0 to 8 years. And you can do so by attending our training, but most importantly, working in partnership. Work in partnerships with organizations, learning organizations and organizations set specifically that work with this group of audiences. Play Scotland become one. Early years learning and child care, even after school child care, childminders and all of those, please do work with them. And don't forget, Education Scotland has a section, a department, and services on their website for 0 to 8 years, and resources plenty there. Don't forget, the Curriculum for Excellence is also used for 3 to 18. That is to use to develop your activities and ensure you speak to teachers, speak to all of the practitioners, learning providers out there, and childcare, organizations. And there is nothing wrong if you need to speak to MGS, put in your grant application, and I, as a learning and engagement, will look into it. And this is something, it's an area of, priority area for us. We want to see this, but we also want you to, how this can be embedded as part of, the museum learning programs.
I'm sure you'll probably now be inundated with people wanting your system. So we have quite a lot of families and parents who listen to our podcast as well. So how would you go about, what would your top tip be on planning a playful visit to a museum? What would you recommend?
I would suggest just spend a wee bit of time beforehand looking into the museum. We put so much information on our website, on our social media, and we really shout about what we do and try and reach parents and hope that parents take a wee bit of time to figure out what is possible in our places before they go. So have a look on the website. We've got a whole section dedicated to your visit and the learning programme and all these things that we do. But if you don't get a chance, just talk to staff. Our staff are so invested in everybody enjoying the ship or our museum as much as possible, and they know what we do every day, and they can say what's possible and give advice. Like, that might not be a good idea, but you can absolutely touch this and give the bell a good ring and just make sure that everybody knows what's safe and what's allowable. And another thing is, I think Loretta alluded to a wee bit earlier, but think about the spaces out with the museum. So our ship is moored just at the back of the Riverside Museum, and we have this huge open space between the two museums of the quayside. And this has really become a lovely area in which different groups use this open space. We have quite a huge community of rollerbladers and skateboarders, and you see teenagers there, but you also see families who maybe don't have access to that at home, but just using the open spaces. And if you get families coming and using spaces near museums in this way, in which is more approachable, just jumping on or jumping into the museum or the ship is the next logical step, and it's less scary because you've been there and used the spaces in different ways. So I would suggest think about it in a holistic way rather than just, this is a museum in the front door, it's out with the museum, it's the spaces nearby, and it's just baby steps becoming more familiar and understanding how museums work and what's possible, I think.
I couldn't agree more with that, but I think I have just one or two things, for parents, who and families who are thinking about it. Just know that museums have to have a family-friendly program. They must run that. If you can't see that, ask them, as Lauren said. Go in there and ask them, why are you not even doing that? That is what they need to be doing. They must be incorporating all of that. And if you have ideas, share it with them. Discuss it with them. The learning and engagement and education staff are always willing to talk to families. It is supposed to be a family-friendly environment, and they will like more ideas. They are always looking for ideas all the time. And please, all museums in your local area should be offering this. And therefore, please approach them, is all I would say. Don't wait for them to even say, oh, look at our website. If they are telling you to look at their website, tell them no. You talk to me. I've come in to talk to you. And that is the way it's supposed to be. That is what MGS is saying that museums should be doing, is outreach. Go find them wherever they are. And if you know an organization like Play Scotland who have parental engagement, activities happening, go there or speak to the Play Scotland and say, where do you have families? So they will reach you. And if we're covering all of this way, please, parents and families, go there. If the timing doesn't suit, tell them what timing suits you. Museums are beginning to be very flexible in terms of, their programs and activities. We even have museums that do museum leads in order to encourage young people to come in order to encourage moms who have been working to be able to attend, particularly even at the weekends, so that, they can bring their children in. Please do tell them they want to know, and they will like that indeed. I would encourage, parents and families to approach, and have ideas, tell them. They will run it, they will share it with you, and, we will, both sides in partnership, collaboratively develop and work out, a program. Just know that even though it's you coming from you, other parents might be, thinking about it too. They probably haven't come to MGS. You might be the one that is helping them, to raise, that kind of activities.
Thank you so much. I think you've actually touched on my next question, really, which is to change. What do you think you need to change to make all museums welcome to children and families? Lauren, do you have anything else to add to that?
Yes, I was thinking about how, I think I've said quite consistently over this, about how it has to be holistic. That learning and museum departments, we are just so enthusiastic about this as far as I can see, but it needs to be the whole organisation buying into this. That it needs to be the front of house team totally understanding and open to this idea of museum being seen in a different way. And if you've got a family who are, maybe going to the museum for the very first time and are a wee bit nervous, one remark from a front of house person who's seen as a bit unfriendly, that might just shatter everything that they've been trying to build up to. So you really need to get the front of house team not just understanding, but really invested and really engaging families in a lovely way, because it's so tenuous sometimes, people understanding in museums about this reputation that we've already talked about. But it also needs to be the very top of museums, that the museum boards and trusts, and they need to be invested in this as well, because sometimes you're doing things that can be quite scary. If you're encouraging children to get a very hands-on approach, you might get people who are a little bit wary about, is this the right thing for our collections and our spaces? Is this something that is worth the investment? We need to get them to understand that it's absolutely fundamental to the future of museums. So it really needs to be the whole way through a museum structure. It needs to be front of house, first point of contact. It needs to be the website. It needs to be the facilities on board. Like, there's no point in a family coming to a ship or a museum if there's nowhere for them to eat or use the bathroom. It's just silly little things like that. To us, it's not silly. It's not silly to families. If a family has children with additional support needs, they need to see that we have things available for them. We've got sensory bags that have ear defenders and emotion cards, so we can support families as much as possible, because it's quite a sensory overload coming to a ship, believe me. So it just needs to be, absolutely every detail needs to be thought about. And you can try things out, try things that are cheap or free, but then if that's successful, you really need to examine everything that you put forward to people visiting.
Lauren has actually covered a lot there, but I will say one thing. Museums that are still thinking about it, they're thinking, okay, we don't know what to do. Please conduct your access audit. Mm-hmm. And look at your venue properly. What needs to change? What can easily be fixed? What is something that, you require from other people to help you with? And as Lauren said, it is not just the responsibility of one person or the learning and engagement person. Welcoming family, children, and young people into the museum is just the same thing as welcoming diverse audiences. It is the responsibility of everybody, and they must be made to feel welcome. So I would say review your programs, review your activities, and ensuring, that, you are improving engagement with young people, putting play at the heart and children at the heart of what it is that you want to do across your policy areas, integrating and incorporating that as part of your priority areas of, delivery. And you do that, and your museums will not survive if you don't bring in the young people into the museums for them to begin to enjoy what you want to do. Then you are not relevant. And therefore, we want relevance, and museums who want to be relevant, we have to do things and change as your society and your environment is changing and your locality is changing. So you've got to welcome families, children, young people into it. And I would say, use everything you have, use your outdoor, use your indoor, make your galleries, be as bright as you can be. Children's like brighter spaces for inspiration, but also at the same time, safeguarding. That is the most important thing too, in terms of children play, children in the museums. Don't break things is one thing, but actually children need to play in a safe environment. If we say museums are safe places, make sure that your safeguarding rules and child protection policies are in place and everybody is aware of this, and do this training if you haven't done so. But most importantly, speak to MGS,
Thank you so much. So my final question is, what benefits have you seen from taking a playful approach?
I think that I will leave Lauren to do that.
I think the fact that we are doing the playful approach within our own institution has opened us up to being approached by other groups who want to use the same spaces in the same way. And it's groups that are do things that we don't have the expertise to do. So we recently worked with Lickety Spit, who are a play and theatre company. And so they came and used our spaces for a drop-in session that they do with communities from quite deprived areas in Glasgow. So again, it's encouraging audiences who've not been to the ship and come onto the ship in a way that is familiar and comfortable, because they know the practitioners but don't know us. And so whenever this happens, I always make sure to show my face and introduce them and make them feel welcome, saying, we are free to enter, you're very welcome to come, we're open 7 days a week. So again, it's that kind of gradually getting them to be more familiar with us through a different kind of entranceway. But another thing I think that needs to be talked about a wee bit, we've talked very much about play being the focus of quite young children. We've been starting to use play in a way for audiences don't necessarily use it in the way that young people do. So we've identified that young people, kind of teenager, I think it was kind of like 12 to 25, that is an age group that we haven't engaged with very successfully, because children come on board with their schools, with their families, but as soon as they hit teenager or secondary school, there's just this huge drop off. And we recently worked with the Art Fund, and they gave us money to hire 2 students from the university, and they were given the opportunity of engaging this age group, which is wonderful because they are of that age group, so they could do it in a way that, as somebody who's quite a bit older, didn't quite have that fundamental understanding. And the thing that they came up with, they were given the invitation to have an event or a thing, and they did a Dungeons and Dragons event on the ship. And this is play. It's imagination, it's storytelling, it is a choose your own adventure, but they used the history of the ship to create a storyline in which young people had their own adventure, and they were on the ship after we were closed. So again, about Loretta saying about flexibility and opening times, these young people were the only people on the ship, and they had this huge playground to create this story and adventure, and it was such a roaring success that we're hoping to do it again. The 2 students who did this project now work for the ship, their front of house team, and so they're promoting this idea of play not just for young people but for people their age group. And I think there's something lovely and free about people of any age being invited to play on the ship. It's not just you play when you're young, but then you approach knowledge in a certain way once you become older. But if they can still play in a way that is familiar and reminiscent, but also really exciting, I think you're extending your audience again. And it's something that we're really excited. And now we're seeing this kind of idea of role playing being used in other galleries. I think the Women's Library is using that in Glasgow. And there was, I think the Discovery in Dundee do this as well. So it's really exciting, and it doesn't rely on digital. Digital has its time and place, but there's something about being in a room with people that you might not necessarily know, but coming together, telling a story and playing. It really is such a wonderful thing, and it was such a wonderful event. I can't recommend it enough.
That sounds absolutely fascinating. I know lots of people that would love to take part in that. I hope you do run it again. That's fantastic. Loretta, is there anything you'd like to add about benefits you've seen? Because obviously you covered lots of different museums.
I think it's just Lauren covered a lot, but I think it's just to bring in one example from a case study, final report of the Summer of Play project, that was submitted to me recently. And during that Summer of Play project, when we look at all of the activities that people, the museums have conducted, the one, apart from Lauren's one that stood out, there is another one that's, really stood out for me, and that the Scottish Maritime Museum. The Scottish Maritime Museum, like I said, the parents, brought their children into the museum for that Summer of Play activities. They enjoyed that. But what they've now done since then, these are young mothers who will never have spoken to themselves before. They have now begun to come into the museums, but you having a session for themselves and have developed a social network for themselves and use the period that the young people are in the museums doing their own thing to be having their own also social interactions. And that has been helping them in terms of, dealing with or combating isolation, because they will never have spoken to themselves before. They didn't have it. It's a sense of purpose to come out of the house, but now they are meeting and making new friends and talking. And now they have developed that as part of, the benefit, of using that as a cohort of friends to socializing. And the museum have now used this to begin to develop and shape activities for mothers and adults or families, in terms of, what needs to be done, what activities that they could do, both, inside and outside the museum. And another unintentional outcomes that you will never have thought it is the benefit it brought to the museum. Lauren mentioned that the little meeting in the cafe area is bringing in a little income generation, for the museum in itself. This was never planned. This was never part of the plan. And then we would never have seen these people coming in, changing the perception of their feel about museums, but now using it as a venue where they can meet and socialize with their friends, but also in terms of, sense of a purpose, coming out, health and well-being, it helps in that sense. So it's not just the little ones, it's also the adults that are benefiting, but indirect benefits goes to the museums in terms of their income generation.
I think what we can gather from both these examples is that maritime museums, be a ship or a maritime museum, are leading the way.
I agree.
I think so. Well, thank you very much for that today. It was so interesting. I think you've definitely blown away the idea that museums are stuffy, dusty and boring places. I think everybody who's listened to our podcast will completely disagree with that now. And it's just lovely to see your passion for your, for making museums more accessible for everyone that's in more playful spaces. So thank you very much for joining us.